setup. Isn't that crazy? New setup. Just my room. But it looks cool. What's up, guys? My name is Mil. I am a college student who loves reading, and I'm here to share that love with all of you. Quick preface. I have 14 roommates. I can't make them all be quiet. So if you hear some noise up there, sorry. I can't control 14 people. So I'm gonna do my best to film at a time where very few people are here. But if you hear noise, that is the reason why. Hopefully it does not disturb you too much. We are just going to get right into it. The book we are reviewing today is The Great Influenza by John M. Barry. It is a book that took me so long to read. Like, so long. Dude, like, I started reading this book in March, and I finished it September 19th, 2023. That's 6 months. 6 months. This book was such a hard read, but I did it. I finished it. And I obviously finished books in between. And I'm still working on books right now, obviously. But this book took me so long to read. It was awful. It was terrible. But it's okay, because I did finish it. And I liked it. I liked the book. It was just really hard to get through. So we will get into that. We will talk about it. But first, let's read the summary. In the winter of 1918, at the height of World War I, history's most lethal influenza virus erupted in an army camp in Kansas, moved east with American troops, then exploded, killing as many as 100 million people worldwide. It killed more people in 24 weeks than AIDS killed in 24 years, more in a year than the Black Death killed in a century. But this was not the Middle Ages, and 1918 marked the first collision between modern science and epidemic disease. Magisterial in its breadth of perspective and depth of research, The Great Influenza weaves together multiple narratives with characters ranging from William Welch, founder of Johns Hopkins Medical School, to John D. Rockefeller and Woodrow Wilson. Ultimately a tale of triumph amid tragedy, this crisis provides us with a precise and sobering model as we confront the epidemics looming on our own horizon. Whoa. So listen, I feel like a lot of us were not aware of this epidemic before we had a panoramic of our own. I don't know if YouTube doesn't like the word, so I'm not gonna really say it, but the Rona Panini. You got it? Good. But as I was saying, I'm pretty sure not many of us knew about this before, 2020 happened. And hearing that people went through what we did just a decade earlier and we knew nothing about it is kind of crazy. But there's reasons for that, and I will talk about those later. But for now, let's just go through the book. So the first 100 pages were probably the hardest part for me to read. It was just an overextensive history of things that just didn't need to be said. There was a whole summary on modern, or on the history of modern medicine, and I think that's important. But if you're going to go into this huge tangent about every tiny minuscule thing that got us up to 1918, it's just not necessary. It's boring. I just didn't have a fun time reading that part because it just didn't seem like it mattered to me. And seriously, there are people that I've talked to this about and they're like, no, it's important. It's you didn't read the book. You don't realize that it's just tangents of things that don't really matter, which is so frustrating because it's I don't need to know what this random guy at this random time thought about this thing if it doesn't matter to the overarching story of the Great Influenza. I understand that you need history on modern medicine to understand the panoramic in 1918, but you don't need that extensive history. It doesn't need to be that detailed. And also, the entire history of William Welch did not need that. I really didn't need to hear about his entire life story, especially since there were so many other key players in this that just didn't get that amount, and he didn't really do that much, because once we actually got to the history part of it instead of like the medical science part of it, which admittedly the history part is more interesting to me, once we got to the history part, he was barely mentioned. At least not mentioned to the capacity that you would think he would be, with like 60 pages of his story. Maybe not 60 pages, maybe I'm exaggerating, but oh my gosh, it just went on forever and ever and ever. And that's what took me so long to read it. It was the first 130 pages that was just boring and unnecessary and could have been shortened. This guy spent like 7 years on this book. It didn't need to be that long in the beginning. Like, teach me what a virus is and how it's different than like other bacteria and stuff like that. Like, teach me the medical history, teach me about William Welch. But I didn't need that much, you know? Like, that really hindered my ability to read this book. And I had to read this for my STEM class that I had read, like Mountains Beyond Mountains and Henrietta Lacson, but we didn't read this one all the way through, and now I'm starting to see why, because oh my gosh, it's so there's just so much information out there, and it's just like, we don't need it all. That's what made me really annoyed, because like it went in circles. It went from like 1880 to 1930 back to 1870, and it's like, it's not important. None of this is important. It's so frustrating. I just want to get to the history and what happened. So around a third of the book in, maybe half the book in, we actually get to the actual history of the Great Influenza, and whoa, girl, it was gruesome. It was insane. It was just, there were a lot of things that, like, I think a lot of people who are squeamish would really, really hate, but I was just reading it like, whoa, this is so cool. Like, I'm sad it happened to people, and it's like I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but since it happened, hearing about it is just like, whoa, that's fascinating. Like, they had cyanosis, like the influenza made oxygen, or made it difficult for oxygen to get into people's lungs, so like people turned blue to the point where they looked a different race. You know, their lungs filled with phlegm and bacteria before getting like stripped away. Like, their brains were swelling, like a lot of crazy stuff. And yeah, it was just fascinating to hear that side of things, and it was also fascinating to hear about the decline and the parallels between both the 1918 and 2020 pansy. So just like ours, the government was incompetent, but even worse. Oh my goodness. There were some people, like, there were deaths tolls in Philadelphia in October, like on October 4th or something, and then the next day they were supposed to have a parade, and they're like, no, just go on to the parade, we gotta boost morale for the war. Like, the war was more important than the sickness. And it was just crazy for me because so many people probably died because of that one negligent event. It was just crazy. Like, Philadelphia in specific was mentioned because there were a ton of death tolls. The government was just kind of useless. People were just incompetent. They didn't want to listen to doctors or health professionals or anything like that, and they paid the consequences. Like, whole families got wiped out. It was really rare to have less than 2 people sick in your home at any one time. It was just scary. People were dropping like flies. The dead were piling up. Like, it was just terrifying. It was like in a horror movie. So even though what happened to us a couple years ago was just terrible and stressful and awful, I kept reading this book saying, at least I wasn't there, because they didn't have medicine that we did today that helped prevent that. They didn't have any way to socialize besides face-to-face contact, really. Like, they were so isolated and alone and scared, and And so were we, but not to that degree. So I am so thankful that I am living in this time instead of 100 years ago, because I don't know what I would have done. Like, that just sounds awful. But yeah, people in government were super incompetent. There was this one guy named Royal Copeland who was New York's health commissioner, except he wasn't a real doctor. They put someone in power who was not a real doctor, and instead of giving useful information out, he said stuff like this: the health department is prepared to compel patients who may be a menace to the community to go to hospitals. Not the sick, not the dying, not those in need, but those who are a menace to society. I don't know what to say to that. They were incompetent. People wouldn't listen because they didn't trust the newspapers, because the newspapers were saying, oh, everything's fine. And the people were like, well, I'm watching these people die next to me. Everything's obviously not fine. And they're like, no, everything's fine. Don't worry. Ha ha ha. The deadliest couple years in history due to illness. Are you kidding me? There are just stupid people in all points in history, huh? But yes, for about a year and a half, it was really, really, really bad. People died most in the first wave from August to October, and then it was like that. The chart was like that, but it happened, and then things started going back to normal. Just kind of like how it happened for us. There were so many similarities, and I think if you wanted to hear them all, you should read the book for yourself. But people started acting like this great influenza did not happen, and I think that's a big reason why we didn't know about it, was because people just didn't write about it. People pretended it didn't exist. There's really no media about it. People kind of just ignored this part in history. Just didn't know how to think about it. And I guess that could be said about us too. There was a lot of TV shows and books coming out as if the whole big sick didn't happen. I mean, you got shows like Superstore, who, showed that, we were in this time, whatever. But besides that, there weren't too many examples of mainstream media that really showed any sort of depiction of that time. And you want to look back and you want to see, like, oh, through social media, like, we're not going to forget it. Like, people 100 years in the future aren't going to forget that like we did 100 years before us. But no one really talked about it. People kind of were just like, whoa, in this crazy time, like, whatever. Like, there were memes about it, but I don't know. I think people just kind of want to forget about it. And I understand why. But people just want to forget. Some people did not forget though, like John and Barry, who wrote this book. There's always going to be people there who do remember. And history is going to continue to be shared. And I feel like this video was all over the place and I didn't cover everything I wanted to, but that's okay, because like, I'm filming in a new location, so I'm a little bit stressed. Not stressed, but like, I don't know, it's just a weird feeling. So I'm just gonna get on to recommendations. I would recommend this book to people who like war history, medical history, medicine in general, science. People who just want to learn more about this big sick. See, that's what I love about this title. The Great Influenza is an exact synonym to the big sick. Like, isn't that funny? I love it. But anyways, this is who I recommend it to. Only read it if you can withstand some boring parts, because it is boring in some parts. But I have nothing else to say. Hope you like my new setup. It's not like it's really done with YouTube in mind, but I just thought that this was the best place in the house and in my room to film. So here we go. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Without further ado, this has been Moo. I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.